this is as you can see on screen, this is a presentation or walkthrough no code and low code software for digital product development. I'm kind of planning to run the session for about, well, it's about 55 minutes. So I think the walkthrough through the slide deck should take in the region of 30, and then we've got a good chunk of time if there's any questions or discussion, because it's always good to have these sessions as a conversation rather than me just talking at you for a period of time. So we can get cracking. Okay, so just a little bit of background for some context. So I'm co-founder and CEO at Mohara. I'm actually a former secondary school teacher, which was a previous career, which I did for 8 years before founding Mohara with Ben Blomley. I've had the fortune of acting as a CTO to 3 startups, and we've invested in quite a few early stage businesses. So I've got a really good understanding of how to get an idea out to market by the use of technology. So when the no code and low code kind of movement started to happen 3 or 4 years ago, it was really interesting for me because it kind of gave opportunities to people who are non-technical that might have a specialism in another field, and what is kind of born into this kind of presentation. So just as this isn't going to be a Mohara sell, but to give you an idea of what we do and why we're placed to kind of deliver this series, is we're an innovation delivery partner. So we work with founders and we work with corporates to basically deliver innovative ideas. So as it says there, we partner to design, build and scale early stage businesses. It's what we're passionate about. It's what we dedicate all of our time to. And it's just fantastic fun to work with great founders and great people. So moving in. So what are we going to be talking about? So we're going to be looking at what low code and no code software is, why the no code and low code movement is an important movement, how to use no code and low code and recalibrate for your MVP and beyond. So what is your minimum viable product and how do you take it beyond that? And then I've brought together a case study for what is a very now successful e-commerce business that started using a complete no code setup. So I've kind of downloaded the process that they used, and we can just talk through and show you some real world examples because I think that's important to take the theory to practice. Okay, so a little bit of an introduction. As we know, tech is only going to continue to be more prominent and increase its impact in our lives. So with that being the case, or being the understanding of certainly of how I see, the kind of future of the world, there's high chances that there's going to be more applications that need to be built. There's going to be more ideas. There's going to be more needs across industry and life in general. So I think the opportunity for people that have not been trained technically to be able to build and launch applications is significant importance. So I think because tech's here to stay and it's only going to become or increase its impact across life, I think this no code, low code movement is very well timed. All businesses that launch, in my opinion, benefit from technology. It's just about understanding how they can benefit from that technology, because they are either tech businesses or technology enabled businesses. I remember having a chat with one of my friends when I first started Mohara almost 10 years ago now, and he was arguing that tech wouldn't be across various different industries or various different things around life. And he said, well, give me a fine example where tech has innovated that you wouldn't even think of. And we were outside Preston Square car park in Brighton. I was like, well, when was the last time you paid someone to exit a car park? And technology has completely changed all of the touch points in airports and everything else. So that's something very, very simple, but it's infiltrated a non-technical business by becoming technologically enabled. But it's important to say, this is really important to say, that people are the starting point, users are the starting point, and technology is the end game to kind of solve problems or offer solutions for those people. It's not a case of building tech for tech's sake. It's having a clear understanding of what you're actually going to be building for. Okay, so this kind of seems like a bit of a silly gift, but it's actually got a fair amount of realism to it. No code makes dreams come true. There are going to be plenty of people sitting out there with a great idea that may not have funds or may not have the capability or the know-how or the network to be able to go and build something. But with tools and software that are out there now, it actually does mean that people can get out really quickly without typing a single line of code. And that just simply wasn't the case even 5 years ago. So it really does actually make dreams come true in some cases. So what is no-code and low-code software? So in essence, they're pieces of software that allow traditionally non-technical individuals to build solutions. These tools make application development simple. And as with the name, they require little to no code to implement and utilize. They've got drag and drop functionality, intuitive user experience and visual guidance. Therefore, anyone, regardless of technical ability, can build applications. And this empowers a lot of people beyond the walls of writing code to take ownership and build applications out for their customers. So it's kind of exactly what it says on the tin, to quote Ronseal, but it's important to just define it at the beginning of the presentation. So that is what no code and low code software are. Okay, so life before. So this is what you'd had to go through. I remember when I first started coding websites in the mid-90s, it was very, very basic. You had to do it in Notepad, and we've all seen this kind of HTML code. I think what is often recognized is that it is a language, and it's very much like asking someone to go and speak Spanish or asking someone to go and speak French. You've got to learn it. You've got to understand how the syntax works. You've got to understand how it plays together. So it was very, very tricky for people to actually, learn the multiple different languages that you needed to do to actually build these applications out. And that's why software development and engineering has been an expensive game from the get-go, because it takes a lot of training, a lot of experience. So progression over time. So the software industry is actually really young when you actually think about it, because it kind of started in the mid-60s. And if you were to go and if you wanted to go and play a game, you had to pretty much build it. You had to go and write it. I remember, I think it was Pong. I think was one of the first ones that kind of came out with the thing where you bounce the ball around, and somebody just simply wanted to create a game so they could play themselves. And that was the story of it. So if you wanted to do something, you had to go and create it. And that's what we call the kind of the wave of the hacker. And then in the 80s and through to the 90s and into the 2000s, but it's like to tail off there. That is where we kind of had the growth of the PC and the personal software. So this is where people were using tools alone, and collaboration was really, really difficult. I'm sure we've all remembered the time where you had to go and exchange something. You put it on a floppy disk and then pass it to your friend, and then they would go and put it on their machine. So you'd write the document, you'd send it to an editor by email, they would make changes, and then you have to edit it. So it was very, very individual, very, very kind of like siloed. With the growth of the internet, things started to become collaborative. So you could write documents together, you could work on business models together, teams could plan and design interfaces together, and collaborative software really started to replace the personal software, because the internet enabled that connectivity. So then the growth beyond that is what we call it's basically the maker's wave. So this is where you can create your own software with the tools that have been created by dedicated software developers. So the internet has allowed us to collaborate. And now people have seen that, well, we've got a lot of people out there, they've got a lot of intelligence, a lot of ideas, a lot of industry knowledge, but they just don't know how to code. So how can we activate these people by creating software that they can then go and make something with themselves? And that's the kind of the area that we're beginning to move into now. And it's very early, but we're definitely going to go that way. So why is it happening now? So we're having to keep up with an accelerated world. The future is less predictable and choices are less clear. Hardcore solutions are less efficient. End users have to be closer to solutions and should have to solve their problems on their own using their domain knowledge. As I said, they've got great industry knowledge. And by not actually having to code, but by using these no-code solutions. We're obviously we demand faster solutions nowadays, faster iteration and faster feedback. We're a very immediate society. We have accumulated a lot of knowledge, and to kind of generalize these existing solutions and rise the abstraction level. We can build UI and flexible domains. The web has moved out of the technological pit that it once was, and we can expand software beyond the kind of 2000 to 2010 arena and move it closer to what is known as the makers. And the goal is that we can co-create and share things immediately with our team members. And that's much more satisfactory for makers than doing anything alone. So it's about collaboration. It's about working together. It's about, kind of seeing a picture as a whole, and then all kind of moving into that space and creating together. So that's why it's kind of happening now. It's the evolution of technology is driving it, and it's just that next stage. So here's a great kind of 5 bullet points that I got off a fantastic article that I've linked at the end of the presentation. So this shows a great move through personal software through to collaborative software through to NoCode. So Microsoft Excel, we've all used that. Google Sheets, I'm sure we've all used that. And Airtable is the NoCode example where you can build complex sheets, complex applications based on this kind of mathematical sheet approach. We use it to handle our deal flow and how we do our deals. Airtable, we've already started to use that. And Cameron, who is non-technical, is one of our portfolio manager and venture lead and EL. He has built an Airtable system to handle that. Microsoft Word has got to Google Docs, potentially Decoder now. This is a fantastic piece of software at the end here. So Notepad went into Dreamweaver, which was very collaborative, and then it's into Webflow. If you've not seen Webflow, it's a fantastic design-led tool where you do the design and then you press a button and it punches out a fully functioning website with HTML code, JavaScript and everything. Fantastic tool for non-technical people. SQL programming, so back-end work, into Microsoft Access database, into Retool. And then Microsoft Project is into Jira. Jira is a collaborative tool. Is there a no-code solution? I think what's interesting, and I put on my notes about this slide, is it's really interesting because you can almost predict where the next no-code piece of software could come from. You want to look for a personal piece of software to a collaborative piece of software to, are there enough people using it that they want to build applications with it, with no code. But it's a great way to kind of show that transition and path that we go from personal to collaborative to no code. Okay, so why is the no code and low code movement really important? So we have this value of business equation that we use at Mohara, which is essentially the total customer lifetime value has got to be greater than the total cost to build, the total cost to serve, and the total cost to acquire. And it's a simple equation, and it's one that you should be evaluating continually. But the idea is that low code and no code can be used to reduce cost across the build, serve, and acquire elements of the business. And the idea is that you're going to have a value, you're going to generate a revenue or a value from your customer. So you've got to be able to build for that customer, so they've got that application to use. You've got to be able to serve that customer, so hosting, and you've got to be able to acquire that customer through marketing means. And that no code and low code solutions can be used across all of that formula to be able to help you reduce that cost, that speed, that agility across those 3 different parts of that formula. And it's really, really important to think about which have got the highest risks and the highest impacts and assumptions, and focus on the best way to consistently validate and optimize those parts. And I've got a piece at the end of the presentation about the pillars of business. And it's really pillars of business being finance, sales and marketing and operations. And it's really important to kind of identify different areas of your business and how could low code and no code be used to kind of get you to market quickly, get you to talk to your customers quickly, get you to acquire customers quickly, without having to spend a fortune or lots of time on dedicated engineering. So it's a formula we use. We call it the value of business equation. And I think it's a really interesting one that anyone who's starting a business or looking to kind of launch with an MVP needs to have a good grasp of, and think about those different areas and work on the priorities of those 3 sections. Okay, moving on. Okay, other areas it's really, really important. Benji and I were just discussing this one earlier today about the fact that it lowers barriers to entry. So the low code and no code movement enables founders who are skilled in other areas. So that could be BD, that could be marketing, it could be finance, anything but technology. And it lowers the dependency on tech and makes launching a successful startup less intimidating, therefore lowering the barriers for entry for budding entrepreneurs. So no longer is it as scary to say, okay, I want to go and build a very simple mobile app to achieve X, Y, and Z, when there are tools and platforms out there that might be able to get you there without writing a single line of code. So I think a really interesting point to say that it actually does lower the barrier to entry. Runway extension. So this is the idea that if you've got a small amount of capital, let's imagine you have £10,000 to launch your business. Back 3 or 4 years ago, to get an MVP out in market, you could easily say goodbye to that and then some to build your very simplistic MVP to go and test your assumptions. So the idea is that if we're not spending as much money on employing engineers to get these very simplistic solutions out there, and we're using no code to do it, it extends our runway, because we might only spend 10% of that, paying our fees to get, the software as a service fees to get them up, our hosting fees. So it really is a fascinating way to kind of see that you can actually say, okay, well, I now can launch this business on £1,000, as opposed to 4 or 5 years ago, it could have cost me 10. So there's an extension. And in line with that, it also allows you to increase your equity value. So if you are having to raise, say, an SEIS round, and you haven't done any assumption testing, and you haven't got out into market yet, you may have done a very simplistic MVP, or you may have even just got a clickable prototype and you've managed to raise money. You're going to spend a proportion of that first funding round at a low valuation to build out your MVP. Now, if you've got low code or no code solution out there and you're able to gain market validation, you're able to get that MVP out there, you're able to gain users, and you're able to do it without actually raising money, you're going to go to market to look for funds at a higher valuation, which means you're selling less of your business. So it's a fantastic knock on. That cost saving not only helps the extension of any money that you have got, it also allows you to get to market and build a business that is worth more before you're actually having to raise any capital. So I think it's a few really interesting points there. Obviously, there's speed. A lot of these tools are plug and play, and you'll see in the case study that I talked to, it's effectively about linking things together, and that means that we don't have to code anything bespoke, so we can do things really, really quickly. And that speed allows us to get to market, it allows us to test, it allows us to iterate, and it allows us to validate cheaply and quickly. And that's a tremendous benefit. Oh, hello. Okay, and then last one. So this is to do with the areas of your pillars of your business. So there's sales and marketing, as I mentioned earlier, operations and finance. And I think it's really, really important to keep these front and center and think about which areas of your business that you're really strong in, which areas of the business that you may look to kind of get support in, and to identify different parts of these 3 pillars that you could use no code and low code to. I'm going to go into a little more detail, but the beauty of it is that these solutions are being developed for every single area. And it's important that when you're growing a business that you keep these 3 pillars balanced. It's a little bit like a tripod. If you let your sales and marketing go, you're not going to be able to attract those customers. If your operations isn't fantastic or great, you're not going to be able to deliver. And if you can't fund the whole operation with your finance control, everything falls apart. So using no code and low code software to be able to make important touch points with different areas of your business to ensure that tripod stays level is a really, really important thing. And you can get solutions across all areas of the business now without spending a tremendous amount of money or time. Okay, so moving into the nuts and bolts of how we do it. So how to use no code and low code. The key is preparation. It's not about running into something head first and thinking, okay, I'm going to go and build this, I'm going to go and build that. Oh, I've seen this tool, I've seen that. You've really got to map it out. You've really got to be prepared to kind of think about what you're looking to achieve. What are your objectives? It's no good going in there and launching something to market if it's not in the correct position. Yes, you're going to go and validate things, but you've got to give yourself the best chance of success when you're thinking about launching an MVP out. And no code can certainly support you, but unless you're prepared, unless you've got clear objectives, it's going to be a very difficult game. So what I would recommend is that you start by defining what an MVP is, and it's sometimes really easy when you're building a startup out to forget exactly what it is in all of the excitement. A minimum viable product, and I don't mean to be teaching you to suck eggs here, but I think it's a really interesting thing to clarify. It needs to be the critical features that your target customers want to use. You go and find out the critical features that they want to use by talking to them. It harks back to that statement at the beginning that people are the starting point. Technology is genuinely the end game. So go and talk to your users and understand the critical features that those target customers want to use. You should have had an opportunity to talk to a number of customers by this point. So listen to their needs and understand what your MVP feature list is. And the thing is about it is you've got to identify those objectives. You identify those objectives by listening to your market. Once you've done that, you identify 2 to 3 features that you want to offer your customers. You know, I've spoken to many founders over the time where they want to build everything, including the kitchen sink. What that does is it detracts from focus, and you'll often spend time and money, I think your own time and potentially money on software as a service or engineers if it got that far, on things that you don't necessarily need. So you need to think, you may think it needs to be feature rich to be a success, but it isn't. It's like focus is the name of the game. You know, an MVP is not the time to having nice to haves. It's the essential elements of what you should be looking for. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to showcase some tools that I've personally seen used within some startups that we've worked with. So much of it is actually achievable, but remember, it's about 2 to 3 core features that you want to do. You know, you may want to build a CMS system that with e-commerce, you might want to do some customer service work, you might want to do some email outbound, but what do you actually really need to do? So some suggested areas that are common and feature genuinely across almost all tech kind of products that go out there. So we have to understand how to host it. Now, Amazon or WP Engine or DigitalOcean, they all offer fantastic out-of-the-box solutions where you can launch a website with the click of a button, or say, I want to link, you know, A with B or C with inside of the hosting space. Just needs a little bit of research around what are the, you know, no-code, low-code hostings, you know, kind of software out there. Content management, obviously, you're going to want to have that flexibility to be able to talk to your customers and to be able to kind of put content out there. So content management tools are out there. WordPress is one of the pioneers of low code. You still had to know a little bit about coding when WordPress first came out. Now with Visual Composer and things like that, it's more in the no code space. But I think Webflow is really taking the content management piece by storm. Testing, so that's very much about ensuring that you've got, you know, the best solution out there. Optimizely is a great tool for A/B testing. Really just plug and play. You put a URL into a piece of software and it kicks it out and you can move things around, drag and drop. Fantastic tool. Analytics and metrics. So that could be Google Analytics. It could be, well, there's plenty of Hotjar is another example. But these are just common areas you could look at. And then customer service, you could look at, say, a Zendesk. And you can link all of these things together without needing to write a line of code. So some of the tools, I've mentioned a few there. Shopify is a great example of one where you can use for e-commerce. It's obviously taken the world over for e-commerce. I think there's over, I don't know the actual stat, but there's millions of sites on Shopify now. Typeform is a great way to be able to get data from your customers. Webflow up here is one that I've talked on. Bubble is a great way to build applications out. Zapier was they're one of the pioneers. What Zapier do is they effectively create API links. So that's application programming interface. So they work with, let's say, Google Sheets, and then there is a Zapier link on the end of that Google Sheets link. And there might be something over here in, let's say, Shopify. And then there's a Zapier link there. And all they do is they connect those two together. So you can say, I want to connect Shopify and eBay. And you go to Zapier and you find the Shopify and eBay one and you click connect. And you buy that. It's about $99 a connection. It would be a lot more if you had to code it. And then suddenly you can pass data between your Shopify shop and your eBay shop. And I mean, Zapier is a fantastic tool to go and investigate. But as you can see, this is just a number that I kind of pulled together quite quickly, but it's already really building out. Okay, this is from a linked article in the bottom of the presentation, and these are some of the tools that are just to kind of go through to give you some context to each of them. So you can build beautifully responsive CMS-driven sites using Webflow. You can build an e-commerce shop using Shopify. A Facebook Messenger bot by Octane. You can build a web app using Bubble, a mobile app using Thunkable. You can build a voice app with VoiceFlow. You could build a complex web app. Here's an example of what I just spoke about, combining Zapier and Airtable. A simple single-page website using Card, paid newsletters using Substack, even VR, AR, and 3D experiences in your browser using Scapic. And I've built VR experiences back in the day where I had to shoot all of the photography myself and code in JavaScript, and it was in WebGL, and it was tricky. So to be able to build augmented experiences is fantastic. You could do an online magazine hosted by ReadyMag, turn Google Sheet into a website with Sheet to Site, and internal dashboards and tools of retail. So you're already beginning to see the breadth, and that's like 10 or 12 examples of some of the things that you can do. So it's, you know, is a very much a research piece in this. Once you've defined your objectives and you know what you want to achieve, then you go to the internet and you go to research how to achieve what you want to do. And this is obviously scratching the surface of what you can do. Okay, moving on. So let's look at an example. So this business has gone from strength to strength, but they started with a no-code example, and it was well documented within Sign Up the Movement about 2 or 3 years ago. So I dug back into the internet and found this, found how they did it, and I'm going to just walk through the tools they use and the approach they use, and then you can kind of get a real world example of what they've done. So the case study, as I said, it is how an e-commerce startup built a high quality MVP with no dev resource. The startup enables donors to easily donate unwanted clothes, which they can then sell online and split the proceeds between the donor, a nominated charity, and the startup themselves. You may recognize which business this is. I can tell you at the end. The process is as follows. Okay, a donor visits the startup's website and completes a type form with their details, such as an address, for the collection by courier. This type form is connected to Zapier, that's the one that has linked those two software together, which notifies the startup of a request per the steps below. A thinking graphic gives the impression that the box is being connected to the courier automatically, when actually the team Joe are booking the courier from PDB or Get. So they've received this request, and then there's a thinking graphic within inside of the website. But really what's happening is that request has come into a team member that they can see via Typeform, into the back end of Typeform. They've picked it up, said, right, there's a request, and then they're actually manually booking that courier. Now, this was 3 or 4 years ago. You may be able to find code that links in to a logistics supplier now, but back then it was given the impression that it was actually thinking, whilst that team member was kind of going through that. So the Zap, which is what they call it from Zapier, creates an entry in a Google Sheet for the thrift box, which is what they call their box. The Zap also creates a card on Trello, on the Trello board for the thrift box. Creation of the Trello card sends an alert to the customer via email. So this chain has suddenly started to happen. So we've hit Google Sheet and we've hit Trello. Google Sheet is where we're picking up the information about it. Trello has then said, okay, we need to ping an email out via email and also via text. So the creation creates a Trello card and alerts the customer via email and also notifies Joe by text. So Joe's going, great, got an order, here we go. And the customer has received saying, thank you very much for the order. Once the courier is booked, so Joe's done that manually, the Trello card is dragged to the next stage, which sends an automatic email to the customer advising them that the courier is booked. So Joe's gone, right, I've done this, been on the phone to PDB, we know when we're doing it, move it across on the Trello board. That sends an email directly out to the customer advising that it's been booked. And then the Zap connects to thrift stores accounts to send the email automatically. So you can see how it's starting to plug together. And this was all no code 2 to 3 years ago. Step 7, the startup documents the box's content in a Google Sheet, which then populates an upload file. This upload file is uploaded to Shopify for sale online. Within Shopify, there are numerous apps to improve the visibility and appearance of the e-commerce store. Thrift, there's the clue of who it is at the end, uses one such app to automatically transfer stock to eBay. This is an API integration that automatically updates pricing and inventory between eBay and Shopify. So the only key manual element currently in this startup is the requirement to move through the Trello board, book the courier, and take photos when they've uploaded them. So they have received the donation. They've processed that donation. They've put it into their Google Sheet. They've put it into their productivity software in Trello. They've then populated it using Google Sheet and pushed it directly up into Shopify for sale online. So jeans have been donated, all of them manually processed through the back, and then automatically populated up to Shopify for sale, and then linked across to eBay in case you want to sell on eBay. All of that was done without any code. Now back, if you were to think about building that system from scratch, you're probably realistically looking at anywhere between 40 to 80 days of engineering time to build that out, even using an off-the-shelf e-commerce store, because of the amount of moving parts within it. So it's a great example of where, a business that wanted to start an e-commerce business, but it was inbound and outbound in terms of its goods, of how they achieved it. Okay, so their tools. So Typeform, they're quickly creating beautiful forms. Zapier, they're connecting different apps to automate the processes. Google Docs, online collaboration tool from Google, including spreadsheets and word processing. Trello is a project management tool based on the Kanban methodology. Google Suites is enterprise level email and workplace. Shopify, you can create an online store quickly and easily with a related marketplace of add-on apps. And then eBay, obviously it's a marketplace and it's one of the world's leading marketplaces. And for the end customer, it's a marketplace where it's a software as a solution system, helping them get online quickly and easily with no upfront costs for the seller. Okay, so very simple, well, conceptually very simple, but the only way that this was possible for Thrift was the fact that when they came to building this no-code solution out, they had their objectives clear. They knew exactly what their feature was going to be, or their 2 to 3 features of what they wanted to achieve. They'd mapped out their journey, and then they went to the internet and they looked at what tools could help them achieve it. And that's one of them. Yes.
We've got a quick question as well from Louise. I can see.
Okay.
I don't know, Louise, if you want to ask that question, or I can ask myself. She's asked, what percentage fee per transaction would a no-code business lose from those tools?
What percentage fee? Say that again, Benji.
So what percent, Louise, you might have to clarify actually your question, if that's okay.
Sure. How much profit, or how much would it cost out of each transaction to be using those no-code tools? Roughly?
Oh, right.
Right, takes 3%, whatever takes X%, etc.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, it depends on their pricing model, to be honest. A lot of these software as a service tools aren't transaction based. It's not a volume based thing. You do get variables on some of them, but they're all very, very different. A lot of them are a monthly fee Zapier, for example, you pay a flat fee, and then you get a X number of kind of communications between it. It's not typically done on, if you were to sell a pair of jeans for £40, are you going to lose £10 to all of the software tools? It's not as straightforward as that. They do, like I said, they do it on variables. So it could be, if it's Stripe, for example, you might get, 100 free transactions, then they'll take 2.9% and a 20p fee. But most of the time with these tools, it's a flat monthly fee with a variable attached to it, and then you can go up in tiers. So if you're doing really well, it might cost you from £20 a month, it might cost you 50, it might cost you 100. But it really does depend on which tools you're looking at. I mean, it's very much like any software as a service tool, really. But it is per case basis, but it's not always linked into what you would sell it for. So if you're doing pure e-commerce, I wouldn't view it as I'm going to lose, X% per transaction amount or volume of whatever that's going to cost, because they're not mostly set up like that. Stripe is, because they're actually taking the transaction, where it'd be very hard for Trello to see that. It would be very hard for Google Docs to see that. They care about you using their software, and therefore you pay typically a monthly fee for the amount of usage that you do. Okay, hope that helps. Okay, so just dropping back into some examples of this. So I talked about the pillars of business before, sales and marketing, operations and finance. So just before we do jump into questions, because I'm conscious of time. So some operations ones could be Zendesk. So you could be thinking about your customer service. How do you get inbound leads? There could be a chatbot on your website, and how do you actually handle the flow of that? So Zendesk is a great example. Sales and marketing, you could do a one-page waitlist website using Typeform that floods into Google Sheets, or a one-pager builder website. And finance, that's the payment gateways into e-commerce, into your automated receipt tracking or your accountancy software like Xero. So you could plug Stripe straight into Xero, and Stripe plugs straight into Shopify. So as soon as that person transacts, you've got a record of that transaction into your bank via Stripe, and it's all captured inside of your accountancy software as well. So that flow is kind of all sorted. But it's important, I think, as a roundup to recognize that equation. So cost to serve, cost to acquire, cost to build, and then look at sales and marketing, operation, finance, and how different tools can support you across that. Once you defined your objectives and once you've thought about your 2 to 3 key features. Okay, right. We have 18 minutes, I guess. How do questions come through on here so I can see them? Is there? Well, I mean, I guess
chat, and
got a chat.
People can either put in the chat or you can unmute yourself.
So yeah, so I'm open for, we've got 15 minutes or so. If there's any kind of questions of what I've talked about, happy to go through anything that may be of interest, or I can go over something else if it wasn't quite caught first time round. Or we could have the.
I think one of the biggest things, at least whilst we're waiting for questions, one of the biggest things that Rich was touching on is this idea that you don't need to let technology intimidate you when building a product, especially in the LSE where there's a huge dominance in social sciences and there isn't that technical background and knowledge. That doesn't need to be the case anymore. That building a tech product, you need to have that background in STEM. You need to have that background in mathematics or engineering. It doesn't need to be the case anymore. And like Rich said at the beginning, this just opens up a whole world of opportunities. Because imagine all the people now that can go off and create technology that couldn't beforehand, and they can use all of their experience from those social science backgrounds.
Yep.
There's a question from Emily. There we go. Do you have any thoughts about which is best website designing page, i.e. Shopify, Wix or Squarespace? Basically, what's maybe one of your ideal go-tos, Rich?
I guess, Emily, this comes down to level of skill as a designer. I think if you have design skill, I would probably push people to Webflow, because Webflow is essentially like a very simplistic Photoshop that gives you a tremendous amount of freedom to create something, and it puts a CMS behind that. So you'll be able to design your page as you would like to design it, and it can go to mobile, it can go to desktop, and then it will process all of that code creation, and you get a lot more flexibility from that, because basically the only limitation with Webflow would be imagination, I guess, or design skill. If you were to go to more of the drag and drop functionality, I mean, Squarespace is very, very popular. Shopify is the market leader in e-commerce, though I do think there is a case for WordPress and WooCommerce, particularly if you've got what's called Visual Composer in there. WooCommerce is a fantastic tool, bit more flexible than Shopify is, but Shopify is straight out of the box, got many, many themes of designs. You can really get a Shopify website up in 2 to 3 hours. It's not that difficult. Don't know a great deal about Wix myself, not really used it, but I've seen some great, fantastic work by Webflow. I mean, if you had to look at kidaddle.com, which is a website for basically finding events to do with your family that we worked with for a while, a lot of their 60-70% of their website was built with Webflow, and they're a thriving business with many thousands of viewers each day. But I think creativity-wise, Webflow is your winner, and you've got the CMS behind that. Squarespace, I know, is very solid, and in the e-commerce space, it's going to be Shopify or WordPress and WooCommerce. But WordPress and WooCommerce isn't as easy to set up, but there are now no-code solutions for setting that up as well. That's probably where I'd point you, I think.
Yeah, Shopify has that scalability as well. They're growing at a tremendous pace. So there's a number of different people providing different apps on. They have obviously their app store. A number of people are providing that. But Shopify is only obviously if you want to create something in e-commerce, that wouldn't be the case.
To give you an example, I mean, we've all probably seen Gymshark and how Gymshark has kind of just sold some stock for 1.7 billion. They're on Shopify. Their full system is powered through Shopify Premium. And so if they're a company that can do as much revenue and as solidly and as reliability as Gymshark, that tells you something. And that's just through Shopify. And they've never had anything else. He got his website up, no code, 5 years ago, and it just went.
Does maybe anyone else have some other questions? Doesn't have to be related also to NoCode. It can be about also our experiences, seeing startups develop at Mohara too. It doesn't have to be just focused on the low code stuff.
No, not at all.
we'll also provide, contact details and stuff like that as well. If anyone doesn't feel too comfortable, I know sometimes in these environments, people might not always feel comfortable messaging on a chat.
Yeah.
But yeah, well, I'll actually just.
I actually didn't put my email details at the bottom of this, Benji, so we're going to have to get that distributed. One thing that is on here, if anybody wants this deck, there's a great. In fact, I could.
We've got another question as well.
Okay.
Actually, we'll go for Arthur's question first. Hi, do you have any great back-end tools which could be connected by non-technical guys? So, yeah, I'm guessing, I suppose back-end's quite broad. Rich, any ideas?
What are you looking to achieve?
Yeah, it depends what the aim is. Is it sort of like a database, something to store some data?
I mean, it's amazing what you can. It's going to sound funny, but it's amazing what you can do with Google Sheets. If you can store data in Google Sheets, there are so many no-code solutions to be able to process that data and use that data. I mean, the example of Thrift from a few years ago, that's one case of where you're populating your website with it. So Google Sheets is a great place to look. I also mentioned up in here.
There was Airtable as well.
Retool is a great one to go and have a look at. Maybe slightly more complex than Google Sheets or Airtable. Yeah. So there's a few in there. I mean, as I've put in here, and I don't know how we're going to distribute this deck, but inside here, this is a reason why it's happening. Inside of this book, this is actually produced by Webflow. It's fascinating, and it's pages and pages and pages, and it's got loads of different examples of back end kind of solutions, front end solutions, marketing solutions, sales solutions, and it's a great place to go and have further reading. And it's just linked off this deck, so I'm sure we can find a way to distribute this deck or make it publicly available.
Yeah, I think LJ can distribute that. But yeah, to your question, Arthur, probably Retool or Google Sheets.
Yeah, and Airtable as well, if you want to process stuff.
Yeah, Airtable too. I mean, if anyone feels like we've got about 10 minutes, if anyone wants to share some of their ideas around startups, we've got about 5-10 minutes. Happy to, if there's certain questions specific to something you're building, feel free to share as well.
This is the interesting. Oh, hello.
There you go. Hi, Louise.
No one else is. I'm trying to build a two-sided marketplace for finding the right therapist for you. And initially, I am just doing really manual verification, getting therapists to photograph copies of their validation or certificates, and me calling up the body and checking it out. Do you know of any no-code tools for that? Or that sort of process?
So the process is that you're going to have a document inbound, and then you want to check that document by phoning up that body to authenticate that document, right?
Yeah, because the body's getting pretty tired of me.
The body's getting tired of you. So would the body be proactive in actually looking at those? So you've got to validate those certificates somehow, right? So they need to be proactive in that relationship, the body, but they're frustrated with you just phoning them up all the time.
That's the impression I get. Yes.
Do you think there'd be any way that they would go and visit somewhere to be able to go and check those off at a defined period of time? So could you pool or aggregate all of your all of your certificates into one place and say, can you come and validate these, please? Here's the link.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So how are you receiving those certificates at the moment? And what, via email?
Yeah.
So you'd be a classic case of Typeform. So build a Typeform where you can receive PDF files. Out the back of Typeform will give you basically a place to view your data, and you can make a public link from that data, share that with them, and then they can come in, and then you can have a form tied to that sheet where they can authenticate. And it could just be a tick box. It could just be a yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. in the back end of where Typeform goes. If you wanted to make it a little more advanced, you could plug Typeform into Google Sheets, and then you could build Google Sheets to say, okay, Richard Sams has come in, he's an occupational therapist, here's his certificate, because the file's there, it's linked. They can view that link, and then in the next column along, you just say verified, not verified, and you've got a yes, no drop-down box. That's how I would approach that. If you could get them to come into the Google Doc, which you would hope you could if they're a governing body.
Great, thank you so much.
Sorry.
Maybe just time for one more question if anyone does have any questions or share their problems or something they're working on.
Any problems? Yeah, it doesn't have to be tech.
Yeah.
Lockdown. It could be
lockdown problems as well.
Yeah.
Cool.
But listen, I mean, if nobody, I understand that sometimes questions when you've consumed quite a lot of information kind of come later. So I think it's really important that we do keep that door open. So if people do have any questions, feel free to reach out to Benji or I, and we will, do our very best to kind of come back to you and give some recommendations or any insight that we can, because I know these things are sometimes quite tricky to think on the spot.
Yeah, absolutely. I left my email address in the chat, but it's pretty simple. It's Benji, so basically my name's on Zoom as well. So benji@mohara.co. So yeah, if you have questions and stuff like that, please feel free to send. Otherwise, yeah, thank you very much for joining us. Hopefully you found this session to be useful. And yeah, we look forward to hearing any questions you have as well coming in through to my email. So let's keep that communication open.